Another year has ended, another decade has ended, and I'm getting old as dirt, and it's time to talk about some punk rock. To get hyper-specific, this is my top 25 albums of 2019. These are not the top 25 best albums of 2019 because this isn't a purely factual matter, but it also isn't exactly my top 25 favorite. I'm trying to balance my personal emotion and the more factual, objective, reviewer-style angle of analyzing music here. And of course, this is all my personal opinion, no matter which way I try to determine it, this is just what I think. Above all, I'm making this video when I make this channel because I love punk and I want to share it. I want to introduce people to albums and bands that they may not have thought about trying before or maybe have never heard of before. And I think it's a lot of fun to talk about the things that we enjoy and why we enjoy them. And that's all we're doing today. So without further ado, here we go with some honorable mentions. I'm doing honorable mentions a little differently than most people do. I think most people treat them as like, if they have a top 25, then honorable mentions are like 26 to 35 or something. But I'm more treating it as a list of albums that didn't really have a chance of being featured, but which I think still deserve a little attention. First up is MPLS, a little EP of covers by Beach Slang. I specifically think that their cover of I Hate Alternative Rock by Bob Mould, I'm not a real punk, so I don't know how to say it, is not only really great, but sacrilegious opinion, I might like its spin on their song a little more than the original. Next up, every once in a while I come across a little EP that just sticks in my heart, that I absolutely adore for its strangeness and the unique things that it offers. These albums are never particularly the greatest or most inventive thing in the world, but a special piece of music is something I always appreciate. This year, that honor goes to Baptized in Space by Blue Anxiety, an album that obviously takes influence from bits of horror punk, goth punk, bit of stoner rock, and hardcore, but mixes them together in a completely bizarre way, creating a thing that I have no idea what to call. I really look forward to the things that they might create in the future. Next up is Neck Scars split with Goddammit, and as far as I'm aware, this is the very first thing that Neck Scars has released. It's a pretty solid, but nothing special, streety, ratty pop-punk record, but it has a lot of potential. If this is really the first thing that they've released, then I can't wait to see where they might go from here. Eskimo Funk by Lesser Funk is a very drawn-out, trippy prog rock style album. It's just a percussionist and bassist. It's exactly as weird as you might imagine it would be with just a bassist and percussionist, and I love it for what it is. I'm cheating a little bit here by including Sister Strange by Sister Strange, in that this album initially was released in 2016, but since we live in the internet era, has been continuously tweaked since then. Sister Strange is a funky, New Orleans-style southern rock. It's ensewed with soul and absolutely drenched in a vibe that I can only describe as pretty much Wiccan or Witch. The vocals are absolutely lovely, and the guitar line is incredibly satisfying. There are lots of bands chasing the sound, but Sister Strange are one of the few that I think absolutely nailed it. Next up, Crucial Moments by Bouncing Souls is an album that I did not particularly click with myself, but I can recognize it has a lot of artistic merit and instrumental skill put into it. It really just leans a little too much into a style of punk, especially for a style of more street punk like this, that I don't particularly care for myself, but I can see a lot of people enjoying, so I'm passing it along, and you should check it out. Do You Dream is the newest output by Dark Thoughts, and it absolutely already has me captivated. It's just a little 7-inch of 2 songs teasing the upcoming album dropping 2020. So instead of getting into these 2 songs, I'll just save my thoughts for when the full album drops in 2020. And along that line, the little 7 inches we have gotten from NoFX's 2019 7-inch of the Month Club are incredibly interesting. The previous 7-inch of the Month Club felt to me like a behind-the-scenes thing, like a bunch of extra songs that are for fun, but aren't necessarily all that incredible. This 7-inch of the Month Club, on the other hand, feels a lot more like each one is a very distinct mini-album. Although less than half of it is already out, what we do have so far is very interesting, and I can't wait to see what else comes from it, and again, I'll wait until all of it is released in 2020 to review it. And my last honorable mention is 7 Inches of Satanic Panic by Ghost. The only way I can describe this EP is as haunting, satanic glam rock. It's something I was never expecting, especially from Ghost, but it's here now, and it's weird, and I'm liking it so far. I wouldn't mind if they take a direction like this on the next full-length album, though I hope they do mix it up a little bit, because an entire 40 to 50 minutes of this could get a little overbearing. Set Us Free by Reconciler is a pop-punk album with a strong respect for old Brit rock melody structures, a very strong, deep-voiced vocalist, and a lot of healthy leaning and drawing from harder versions of punk. Overall, it leaves a more poppy impression, but with a lot more to dig your teeth into and grip onto than your average pop-punk record. Or I guess your average generic pop-punk record. Not trying to diss all pop-punk, there was just a lot that wasn't that good back in the day. Next up, I never figured out if these were singles or just independent releases, but the Smith Street Band is back with I Am Nothing and Chips and Gravy. I love this deeply Australian, Brit rock-influenced punk band, who have recently been exploring a more emo and definitely pop-influenced structure to their melody. I'm really happy to see that they're continuing this experimentation from 2017's More Scared of You Than You Are of Me. It really makes the hard and intense punk moments of their songs all the more rich after the new and much more fleshed out build-up they've been developing to these payoffs. Pre-Hysteria by T-Rextasy was a wonderful album and has only grown on me with time. T-Rextasy are a quirky, sort of surf punk influenced light pop punk band with lots of brass and an amazing prehistoric theme. They call themselves the Dino Dames. It's charming and I can't wait for their next release. I did a video on them, but it was technically, like with the audio mastering and stuff, an incredibly terrible video, so I have to make another one sometime. You know it's been a good year of music because we're almost done with our C+ bands and are going to be heading into B- soon. On their self-titled album, Cabanaware used a distorted and hazy vibe to etch their own identity into a generic pop-punk and high-voiced sound. I think the guitar definitely steals the show here, and at times this album was so close to being really good, probably a B or B+, but I feel like several times the band just loses their way and gets swept up in their experimentation or swept up in trying to find their identity, which makes perfect sense. They're still a relatively young band. As far as I'm aware, this is the first music they've released, at least to the public stage. So I think this album is good, not great. It definitely has shining moments, and I can't wait to see where this band goes from here. Pin by Signals Midwest is my Midwest emo album of the year, so if you like Midwest emo or Midwest punk emo fused sound, then check this album out. It's the best from that category of the year, in my opinion. A Different Shade of Blue by Knocked Loose was my favorite pretty much straight-up hardcore record this year. It has a very definite horror, kind of goth edge to it, but is for the most part at its core a hardcore record, with a very nice, I don't want to say melody, but it sticks into its groove. It's not pure walls or waves of sound like some hardcore is. I've never been a huge Sum 41 fan, and am therefore not very familiar with their discography. They always leaned into that flavor of pop-punk that just wasn't my thing. But I actually checked out Order in Decline after hearing one of the singles on the radio, and yes, that's the first time in years that that's happened to me. I've never denied that Sum 41 have instrumental skill. They're not the most incredible band out there, but they definitely have some unique things to bring to the table. In the past, I've more of just had an issue with the types of melodies they've decided to write. And on this album, taking a very strong inspiration from horror punk and blending that with the emo inspiration that I think they've had in more recent years, though I'm not sure. It creates something that I was surprised I really enjoy. At points, it even reminded me of Creeper, and since Creeper is gone forever now, I'll take anything I can get like that. I know I don't think that they actually are gone forever, but and being a Creeper fan is a wild ride. If anyone wants to clear this all up for me, go ahead and leave a comment, because I can use some verification. Stay Rad was a mid-tier Teenage Bottle Rocket album for me, leaning to the higher end. It wasn't their best, and it wasn't their worst, but I love Teenage Bottle Rocket, and I'm always happy to have a new album. They're one of those bands where they pretty much always have the same core sound, but each album explores a little bit of a different aspect of it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a band like that, and I'm always happy for more, and always looking forward to more. Things get a little more bold, brash, and melodic hardcore with Kinds of Light by Uniform Operator. This is their first real album, and I like what I hear. It's definitely a more simple and ratty take on the sort of melodic hardcore influenced by and weaved into early 2000 bands like Fall of Troy. The album is absolutely just an injection of youthful energy into the genre, and is a great jumping off point for this band's career. Next up is something that I'm sure will be a controversial opinion, Songs of Armor and Devotion by Strung Out. This album was very difficult for me to judge because I was really conflicted between trying to tell if my thoughts on it were actually objectively because of how it was written, or if it was because Strung Out is doing something really different here, and that I just wanted them to be how they have been. Strung Out are a band that have experimented a lot, and I've generally been open-minded and willing to go along with whatever they do, but for here they kind of strayed a little too far from what makes them special to me. The new percussionist was also kind of a struggle to get used to. The album is definitely good, and the musicians are still definitely as talented as ever. But in a weird way, the album feels like it's slower, even though it's definitely not. It's more like the themes and the progression of the melodies meander and wander around a lot more than what's typical for Strung Out. It's commendable how much they try to stretch out and experiment with a more grandiose sound, a lot like how Bad Religion did in their later years. But I feel like they also often get lost doing it. It creates an album that's still definitely far above average just due to the sheer skill of the musicians, but which isn't particularly special among their discography or a shining example of their skills when they are fine-tuned and at their peak. Next up is Yes I Can't by Devin K and the Solutions. Devin K and the Solutions are the quirky indie band that your parents warned you about. They're a sort of dance punk, post-punk fusion, but with some folk punk, classic punk, and British prog rock and British pop rock all thrown in there in the blender. It's very dangerous to mix genres like this, and most of the time you can get a band that's kind of pretentious or just weird. And while I can see if this band kind of hits those marks for some people, I only enjoyed this little experimental mess. I have a full video about it, and it's one of my better separate album reviews, so check it out if you want. Uprising by The Restarts is absolutely the reason that I'm always searching for new punk music to be discovered. I completely missed their first release, but grabbed onto their second earlier this year. And Uprising is furious and talentedly played straight-up punk, or some might consider hardcore or melodic hardcore, and it definitely has elements and heavy influences from straight punk and oi. It's exactly the kind of music you'd expect from angry Londoners, and I love it. Next up is Good Riddance, Thoughts and Prayers. Total disclaimer, when I made the original review, I was under the influence of substances which will not be named. That led me to definitely be a lot more positive to the album than I probably would have otherwise been, and especially get a little carried away into reading into the themes of the record. But that doesn't change that it's a really good album. I think it's one of Good Riddance's best, though probably not their number one. I really am a fan of how much they've grown as musicians, and how they're experimenting into this more unified sound among their albums. They used to have a very song-by-song approach to their music, and I really enjoy that they're taking such a stronger focus on making the album as a whole. I think this grandiose thing is a thing that they can pull off well. Pure Drivel by Kicker was a wonderful way to start the year. Kicker is not as heavy as I thought it would be considering some of the band members, but it's still something that I'm really enjoying for what it is. And this might be my favorite release of theirs so far. Pure Drivel, with all of its British cheese and immature song titles and political edge, is just a wonderful, beautiful dose of classic punk. The instrumentalists are skilled, and it's done very well here, and it's the kind of music that I just adore and can listen to for days. I always want more of this. Following is The Spine That Binds by Tsunami Bomb. The Spine That Binds can only be described as rich and satisfying horror punk with a big, profound, grandiose atmosphere and dashes of synthesizer. It's a strange and in some ways daring and bold album, and that's the way I love my music. Next is We're Catchy by The Pathogens, and that pun is all you need to know about this band. They're fast, lively, youthful pop punk with that sort of ska-ish flair, especially with the vocalists. And this album is just a brisk huff of adrenaline. And next is and after that we have Get It Together by Make War. This album kind of flowers from that same basic pool of dredged out post-punk emo as bands like Cloud and Nothings, but then completely turns back around and embraces the punk roots, like a flower growing back into the soil and then sprouting back out. And because of this, in many ways, it's kind of a best of both worlds, with the emo themes and flow, but a very punk edge and attitude. And next, to wrap up this chapter of the video, is Chosen Family by Burn Burn Burn. Burn 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 is a band that I really love a lot and have for a long time, and that I want to talk about, but I've had a lot of difficulty trying to put what I find special about them and their sound into words. So if you're interested, I recommend that you just try and give them a listen. If I had to, I'd word it as melodic and catchy punk that's also incredibly subversive and never lets you get into the groove of the melody before mixing it up and doing something really interesting. And now we're getting there. The next 4 albums I've all rated a B+, and this album I'm putting first here at number 6, not because it's worse than the others, but because of the effect that this album has. In actuality, I think that due to its own merits, You're Welcome by Cokie the Clown could potentially be in B+ or A-, maybe an A. The issue is, a big part of music to me is replayability and the way that you can listen to an album over and over again and how you can draw out different effects, come to understand the music more fully, all of that good stuff. I think You're Welcome is an incredible album. It's very well written, but it's also very hard to listen to more than once. It's a lot to digest. I've pretty much gone for months at a time between listens for this record, and when I've returned, I found that I haven't learned that much new about it when I re-listened because of the big bulk of it dropping its message the first time you listen to it. For moviegoers out there, it's kind of like watching Infinity War after seeing Endgame. It's still impactful and effective, but it can never be nearly as much as it was. So because of that, I think that it's kind of held down. But if you do want to hear more of my thoughts, I have a video just focused on this album. Next is Everything Is Fine by Much the Same, and I can't believe that Much the Same is still around, that they're back. I really thought that they were done, and that kind of had me bummed, but I think that this new release, this returned Much the Same, is the best that they've ever been. Everything Is Fine is that fast, furious, and very catchy melodic hardcore that I love so much. I may not have communicated it that much on this channel yet, but as I talk about more albums, it'll become clear just how much I love this kind of music, even if it isn't incredibly groundbreaking. Do this fast, impactful, punching skate punk, and I'll love your band. Next album takes a little bit of explaining, so allow me to do that, and it's Magnum Opus of the Inglorious Kind by Panicland. I was really divided for figuring out if I would put this album in the 2019 list or the 2020. It's being released in a very unorthodox manner, one song at a time seemingly, for the entire album. So I've decided to treat the 4 tracks that have been released at the time of this recording as a sort of EP, and if I discuss the once it's fully released, I'll kind of treat it as a separate entity. The way I see it, Panicland specifically have released these songs first out of order of how they appear on the fake album, because these are the songs that they're probably most proud of and want us to see. This is their artistic vision apart from the meta meme of this album existing at all. And the 4 songs released so far are incredibly strong. They're very good, both as homages to Green Day and as just standalone songs. I have a lot to say about this album and project, and I think I'll save it for when the entire thing eventually drops, if it ever does. And here at number 3 is Garden by Tree River. I'm absolutely a sucker for a very strong, focused little concept of an EP, an album that's short and can keep its focus to hammer home a very specific and concentrated experience. That's one of the reasons that Forest Life is my favorite folk punk album, and that specific type of very focused, concentrated, and deliberate, carefully executed, and distinct energy and atmosphere is abundant on this little EP. Alright, we're getting close to the end here. Just 2 albums left. The next 2 teeter between a B+ and A-, and I'll discuss why. And it's also pretty much a toss-up. One could have been number 1 and the other could have been number 2, and it could have been the other way around. So consider them pretty much tied. The album I happen to have at number 2 is Morbid Stuff by Pup. Morbid Stuff is incredibly interesting, well executed, and absolutely melodically ferocious. It's very close to a perfect album with all of the strong elements working in its favor. I think the only downside is the album flow is a little janky. There are ways you could rearrange the songs to make it flow better, and 1 or 2 songs are kind of interchangeable and could have been dropped from the album for a slightly tighter experience. That being said, it's a very good album. I love Pup to death. If you don't know Pup, you need to check them out. And lastly, my number 1 album for 2019 is Live in a Dive by Face to Face. There is a certain unspoken thing about music, and that's live albums like this are pretty much the ultimate music version of fan service. A really good live album like this exists to give fans exactly what they want. Because of that, and because I absolutely adore Face to Face as a band, this album makes me incredibly happy and is, in all ways that are important to a fan of Face to Face, it's a perfect album. It's absolutely perfect, flawless, incredible. The part of me that loves Face to death wants to say that this is an A or A+, just a perfect album. Though the more skeptical part of me knows that there must be some flaws in it somewhere, I just can't happen to see where they are. I really have nothing negative to say about Face to Face's Live in a Dive. As a longtime fan, I think it's one of the stronger entries in their catalog, and is actually possibly the best place to get new fans into them. It's incredibly efficient at being a jumping on point, and I highly recommend it for that. If you even just like face-to-face, skate punk, hard pop punk, more melodic hardcore, I absolutely recommend this album, and it's the one that I'm determining is my favorite, my personal best for 2019. Well, that's my personal subjective opinionated list. I'd love to hear what you think were the best albums of this year and possibly this decade. I've decided not to do a top bands of the decade list like I was originally planning. I found that the most enjoyment I get from this channel is focusing on bands that I really, really like and allowing myself to make really, really long, overly detailed videos about them. So I think going into the new year, the direction I'm taking is to dive into some of my personal favorite bands of the decade and to talk about them more as we give time for new bands to develop. That being said, if any of these piqued your interest, I hope you check them out. I'm really interested to see what you think of this list in the comments below. If you like it, leave a like. If you dislike it, leave a dislike. And I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful new year.